Hey everyone, George here, and today I want to talk about probably my favorite horror movie of all time, Friday the 13th, Part 2. It's the one that introduces Jason into the franchise. I mean, technically he was in Part 1 where he jumps out of the lake at the end, and we'll get into that a little later. But I just wanted to come and sit down here and just talk to you for a moment and just explain to you as to why Friday the 13th, Part 2, is one of the greatest horror films of all time. And we can't start the conversation of Friday the 13th, Part 2 without analyzing the opening scene of the movie where Alice is living by herself. It's said later in the movie that this is 2 months after the events of Part 1. So she, I guess for some reason, she wanted to live by herself and live not too far away from Camp Crystal Lake because Jason needs to be able to get over there, and somehow he's able to read. He has to look her up in the phone book because he calls her later in that scene. So she's laying in bed. She's having a nightmare, which works as a recap. It's recapping the events of the first film. Then she wakes up from her nightmare, goes and showers, which kind of implies that she can't hear what's going on in her apartment. Then she talks to her mom, which acts as exposition, kind of explaining that she's living on her own, all that stuff. For some reason, she doesn't lock all the doors. Her window's open. The chain link lock is not locked. You think that she would be a little more cautious. But this whole scene plays out like a recap, just sort of setting everything up, and Jason seeking vengeance. Because I guess what happens is he tracks her down in the phone book, goes there, sneaks in, puts his mother's head, Pamela Voorhees' head, in the fridge, okay, goes somewhere else in the apartment, because I'm assuming there's 2 phones in this apartment, because she then gets another phone call after she talks to her mom. She gets a second phone call with no one on the other line, which leads you to believe that there are 2 phones in the apartment. Unless, like, he's actually in the apartment next door, maybe, and then he makes a phone call, I don't know, and then sneaks in. But I don't think he would be able to do that. So he's in the apartment, 2 phones, and he makes sure Pamela Voorhees' head is the last thing Alice sees, because she opens the fridge, there's the head, right? Then he comes in and just gets her in the temple, and then that's it. That character's done. And we do the opening credits, which you are invited to just a beautiful score. The Friday the 13th franchise, in my opinion, I love the score, especially of the early installments in the movies. The score is just nice violins, intense violins. It's fun. It's just a wonderful, wonderful score. Another thing that is great about this movie is the blocking. The blocking in this film is superb, for the most part. There's some parts that I'm like, I don't really know the layout or how a person's over here and another character's here. But for the most part, the blocking is great. Steve Miner directed the film, and he did a fantastic job with the blocking of this movie. There's shots where the couple is walking up the steps. You see the spear there leaning against the staircase, which was put there earlier. And you see the couple going up the steps. They don't focus on the spear. They kind of just walk by it. The camera's focusing on them going up the steps. Do a great job where they just kind of have it lingering in the background. And that's the spear that will get them later on. Another great example of the blocking in this movie is the scene when Ginny is already in the cabin. This is like toward the end of the movie. Ginny is in the cabin. She's kind of like looking around, and you see a window there, and she turns and you see Jason running toward the cabin. Just great. Just really good. It's a really good shot. Just like really well planned out. There's a lot of shots here are pretty well planned out, honestly. The car sequence is a great one too, in terms of like blocking. She's in the car and he sort of pops up in the window. Another thing with the blocking is there is a shot that you think is like bad. It's like a mistake. Is Ginny's hiding behind the car, and then Jason's running, and then looks, and you know Ginny's head is like up. He can totally see her head. And he runs off. And then Ginny gets up and then runs on. And further down the path, Jason jumps out. So Jason saw that. It's just a great example of just how much thought was put into this movie. like, you can make the argument that it makes no sense about Jason being alive and living in the woods, and then it draws in the question of, like, what actually happened in that final scare in the first movie. Did, like, Jason jump out, grab Alice, and she got away? Or did Jason do it and then all of a sudden just gave up, like jump out, and then just all of a sudden gave up and then let Alice just hang out there in the lake? Or he thought Alice drowned, maybe? Maybe that's what it is, and then they saved her. Either way, it doesn't really make any sense that Jason's real. They thought he drowned in the lake and then was just living out in the woods. He wouldn't come see his mom. You know what I'm saying? Would he just watch from a distance? He wouldn't actually see his mother. His mother was there in the woods in part 1. How come he didn't come and see her? But anyway, just you gotta suspend your disbelief and just enjoy the ride. Another thing that this movie does great, aside from the fantastic blocking, is they do a lot of gun on the mantle moments. So, gun on the mantle, the rule in filmmaking or screenwriting is if you're in the first act and you show a gun on the mantle, you better use it by the third act, or else the audience will be disappointed. And he does that. He establishes that Ginny's car is old and has issues, establishes that pretty early on in the movie. It shows that, and then she has car trouble later on, leading up into that scene in the car where he comes and he starts pitchforking the roof. The setups are great. There's this shot where she's putting the chainsaw away, and that chainsaw is used later in the movie as well. But anyway, the movie is fantastic. The blocking is fantastic. The setups are great. The payoffs are great. There's really not much to dislike with this movie, to be perfectly honest with you. Another reason why this movie is fantastic is the characters. Yeah, you can argue they really don't flesh some of them out, and they're very much archetypes. But they're fun archetypes. They're lovable archetypes. What's there not to like about some of these characters? You have Ginny, played by Amy Steele. What's there not to like about Ginny? Amy Steele did a fantastic job. She just knocked it out of the park. Her character's so charismatic. She's quirky. She's outwits everyone in the movie. I mean, I consider Alien a horror movie, so I would say Ripley's my favorite final girl if I had to do that. But if we say Alien's not, I would say Ginny, played by Amy Steele, that is my favorite final girl in a horror movie, is Ginny from Friday the 13th Part 2. Another character that's incredibly likable is the character Ted. There's nothing to dislike about this character. He's just a fun best friend. He plays pranks on people. He seems like he would be a really fun camp counselor to have as a kid, which unfortunately doesn't happen because, Jason kind of ruins the party. Thankfully, none of those kids come to the camp. Camp's closed. But all in all, Ted is great. He's so likable. He doesn't get killed off. He goes into town, drinks at a bar, has a good time, flirts with the bartender, and then he goes and asks some locals if there's an after hours place in town, and he's like, there sure is. And so he's gonna go and have a good time with those people. That's the other thing too, is this town? Honestly, I don't know, maybe they're just trying to ignore the dark history of Camp Crystal Lake, because the entire town seems to be partying at that bar. You have everyone there, all ages there. And this town seems amazing, and everyone just drinks and parties and has a good time late into the night and just ignores that there's a crazy, baghead, wild man in the woods going around stalking people. It seems like a great bar, seems like a fun town, honestly. And Ted is just such a darn likable character. You find me another character in any other slasher movie that is as fun as Ted. I challenge you. He's just such a likable person. He really is. I like to think that he went on and lived a very long life after that. Just stayed far, far away from Camp Crystal Lake, left the state, went nowhere near Camp Crystal Lake, maybe went nowhere near other campgrounds ever again, and just lived a very long, happy, peaceful life. Another thing, though, is a little bit of sadness. They're all fictional characters, but his two friends, if they didn't go off seeking Camp Blood, they would not have gotten in trouble, and they would have gone out and partied till the sun came up with Ted, and they would have survived too. But they didn't. So, they had to raise the kill counts because it'd be kind of weird if there was only going to be 4 people there, and then Ginny and Paul come back, and there's only you know, the count was only like 4 people versus like 6 is much bigger. So they needed to go to make to flesh out this massacre, if you will. Another thing about this movie is this movie really only covers 48 hours. The first 43 minutes of this film is like almost entirely 2 days. And then the rest of the movie is one night, the final night of this 48 hours. It's not a night anyone wants to be a part of, but that's how the movie plays out. And some classic horror movie kills and horror movie moments take place in that final night after the 43-minute mark of the movie. Paul and Ginny decide to go into town for one last party before they have to really focus on work. So they go to that bar. Like I said, this bar seems to be one of the most happening countryside bars in all of America. Ted, Paul, Ginny, and a bunch of extras, they pile up in their pickup truck and they go into town and party at this bar while there's 3 couples that stay behind, so a total of 6 people. They stay behind, and it's unfortunate. They will have to deal with Jason Voorhees. Now, a few things happen that are kind of interesting during this last section of the movie. Is when the characters, I know it's a horror movie and you want to show some skin, but when the characters go skinny dipping, and she goes skinny dipping in a lake in the middle of the night, in the middle of the woods, in the middle of summer in Connecticut. I have camped, I've canoed down the Connecticut River, done all that in Connecticut woods and New England woods at night, and there are so many mosquitoes, there are so many bugs out that taking off all your clothes and jumping into a lake is like the last thing you want to do in the middle of the night. So that scene, I just can't get around that scene. I'm like, oh my God, it's so gross. Oh my God, how is this happening? Because there are so many insects around, so many mosquitoes, but she does it, and the audience gets to see some nudity. And, you know, it's a horror movie. It's an early 80s slasher movie, so you're going to see some skin, and there you go. But the logistics of it. The other thing is Jason makes a rope trap, apparently. I guess he just had it randomly on the pathway. So he can't be everywhere at once. So he makes a rope trap to capture some of the people, I suppose. So that also makes me wonder, are there other traps in other parts of the camp? I wonder. We don't know because no one else set him off. But it's interesting. He made a rope trap because he's more of a wild man in this movie rather than like an unstoppable juggernaut monster that he is later on in the series. Okay, so let's stop for a moment and take our gaze off of the camp and just go back to the bar. The bar that's having clearly the most fun party in all of North America. So now we see Ginny, Paul, Ted, and then there's like some extras too, hanging out the bar. Ginny is basically explaining everything to the audience. In case you're not aware, Ginny will explain it all to you. She's studying child psychology in school. It's mentioned earlier in the movie, so she understands the psychology of a child. She basically explains everything for you, so you don't have to even like use your brain at all. The way it works is all the other characters are all about partying, and then the final girl is usually the one who's more serious or the most clever character in the movie. And that really is the case here. Ginny is the most clever person in the room. She tells everything. She explains the whole shebang to you, and you don't have to use your brain. She tells you exactly what's going on with Jason, how that all played out, and now he's living in the woods, and he's angry and scared and seeking vengeance. Another thing is that always kind of bothered me because it's almost like a Deus Ex Machina happening in the story. Is Ginny is the most clever person in the room, and she outsmarts Jason almost every time. But there's a scene where she's hiding under the bed, and then there's a rat, and then she pees herself, and there's a lot of pee coming out. And so he decides to just stand on a chair with a pitchfork and wait for her to stick out, come outside, think everything's safe, and then climb out from under the bed. Versus just like pitchforking under the bed, which probably would just work just as well, but he just stands on the chair and waits. The chair breaks, and that saves her. And that's always kind of bothered me. It's such a weird chance. I would have liked it if she would have figured out her own way out of that situation, honestly. It's not a good situation to be in, so I feel like maybe it's a little lazy with the chair breaking and saving her life, but I don't know. I just feel like they wrote her that she's a strong, intelligent character, that she can problem solve her way out of the situation, and for some reason this time they chose not to do it, and they just had Chance save her life. Another thing that kind of bothered me, another moment with Ginny was, with the writing with Ginny, was that when Paul and Ginny get back to the camp, and they find all the blood, and like Ginny's all upset, her cleverness diminishes a little bit. She relies too much on Paul. In fact, when they're looking around, she's like, "Paul, there's someone in this room." Then Jason slowly rises with the spear, and Paul and Jason fight. She just stands there. She doesn't do anything to help Paul. She kind of just stands back. I feel like Ginny would do something. All she has to do is pick up something heavy and hit Jason. I feel like it's two Ginnys right there. It's interesting, but those two things I didn't like was the chair breaking to save Ginny, and her just kind of standing back and letting Jason just like pummel on Paul. So anyway, let's go to the ending of the movie. So Ginny survives. She's clever. She puts on Pamela Voorhees' sweater, and she tries to kill Jason, but at the last second, Jason sees his mother's head, and so he reacts. Paul comes in and starts fighting Jason again, and Ginny picks up the machete and then slams it down on his shoulder, going deep in, and he falls, and like we assume he's dead, which he's not, of course, and they limp away, and they go back into a cabin to, I guess, recuperate, probably figure out what to do next, because I guess they need to find car keys. So that's why they didn't just go straight into a car so they could drive straight to a hospital. They decided, hey, let's just go and stay at this cabin for a few minutes. The cabin scene is the last scare of the movie. You have the dog. One of the characters had a dog in the movie, and you assume this dog was dead, but the dog's alive. It's this nice little Shih Tzu. I believe it's a Shih Tzu is the breed. Dog's all alive, and then there's this happy music, kind of similar to the end of Friday the 13th Part 1. And she's like, "Oh, come here," to the dog. And then Jason pops through the window, slow motion, without the sack over his head. You see his face, and he's all deformed, and he's grabbing her. You know, they do the flash to white to the next morning, and she's being lifted in a stretcher and taken, and she's asking where Paul is. She's asking what's going on. She gets put into the ambulance. The doors close, drive off. End of the story. Then we cut to the final shot of the film, which is back at that shack that Jason lives in, where all the bodies are there. Everything seems normal there. Everything's calm. Well, we know from like a franchise standpoint, that final scare did happen because Jason survived. If that's the case, we need to think about how the first movie ends. That scare where Jason jumps out of the lake and pulls her under, assuming Jason just thought Alice drowned and left her, then we believe then that last shot was real, or that last scare was real. This last scare was real, and we are under the assumption that it really did happen, and she is the only one that survived. I'm assuming the dog survived too, or maybe the dog just ran off into the woods somewhere. And maybe Jason has that dog as a pet now. Who knows? We don't see that dog anymore, but, you know, he could just keep that dog somewhere else. Why would the dog be going around the campgrounds where he's stalking, you know? And it would be like he might still just be taking care of that dog for all we know. Something else I'd like to point out, post-movie, at the end of the movie when everything ends, I like to think that Ginny's character just moved on with the rest of her life, because a year later, she has a guest star role in an episode of Family Ties, and she's a college student, and I like to think that's the same person, that she just moved on with her life. She just changed her name, continued her studies, never returning to Camp Crystal Lake, just living a long life. So yeah, I love Friday the 13th Part 2. In my opinion, it is my favorite Friday the 13th movie. I put that at the top of the list of Friday the 13th movies. I know some people make the argument that part 1's the best or part 4 is the best, which part 4 is pretty darn good. And I know some people that love part 6. I know some people who love part 7. I mean, part 6, part 7, I love those too. I love part 4. Heck, I even love Jason X. But part 2, that's where the magic happened. Part 1, you had this fun slasher movie with like a kind of like a murder whodunit, like, who's killing these people? I don't know. And then it's like this older woman just seeking vengeance on the death of her son, or believed to be the death of her son. And then part 2 comes along, and they go the slasher film route, and I think they really knocked it out of the park. I think Steve Miner really knocked it out of the park. I think everyone in that film did a fantastic job. The movie was made in 1981, so it's technically an 80s slasher movie, but it's still 81. It's like early in the 80s, so it still has that feel of the 70s. So it's not like the visuals are as super polished as movies later in the 80s. Like by the time you get to like part 4, part 6, part 7, the lighting is a little more polished, and part 2 has that raw 70s cinema feel. So it just adds to the spooky factor. The score's amazing. It will forever hold a special place in every horror movie fan's heart. And it's just so darn good. If you have not seen it, go out and see it. I know I kind of spoiled everything. If you haven't seen it, in the title of this video, it's going to say it contains spoilers. But if you just wanted to watch this and now you want to see the movie, by all means, go see it, because it is wonderful. Go out, rent it, stream it, do whatever it takes. See this movie. Steve Miner did a fantastic job. Amy Steele knocked it out of the park as one of the best final girls in any American horror film. Any horror film, actually, in general, I would say globally. So by all means, go see it. It is so darn good. Stream it, rent it, watch it, enjoy it, and then watch it again. Bye.